The sun had barely risen over the Philippine hills when the world that three women knew began to fall apart. Lieutenant Aiko Tanaka, a 27-year-old army nurse, stood on the hospital veranda watching the horizon. Her white uniform was dust-stained, her hands trembling from sleepless nights tending to the wounded. Around her, the base hummed with nervous energy, officers shouting orders, the faint thud of artillery in the distance, and the smell of burning oil carried on the morning wind. Inside the hospital tent, Reiko Mori, a radio operator with quick hands and a sharper wit, hunched over a half-broken transmitter, desperately trying to reach command. The static screamed in her ears. "Signal's gone again," she muttered, slamming the switch. "We're cut off." Near the cots, the youngest of them, Emiko Sato, only 20, adjusted the blanket over a wounded soldier. Her eyes were full of quiet fear. "Do you think they'll reach us?" she whispered. Aiko looked at her, so young, so full of life before the war had swallowed everything. "We'll do what nurses always do," she said softly. "We'll help whoever's in front of us." Hours later, the base was taken. The women were rounded up with dozens of other medical staff and soldiers. What followed was confusion, shouting, and the long march toward an uncertain fate. Days turned into an endless line of footsteps through dust. Hunger clawed at their stomachs, and thirst burned their throats. Reiko tried to keep the group's spirits alive, whispering small jokes or humming songs they once sang at school. Emiko stumbled often, her feet blistered, but Aiko supported her shoulder every time. At night, when the guards allowed them to rest, they would sit close together beneath the broken moonlight. "I used to think war was about glory," Emiko said one night, her voice trembling. "But now it feels like a dream I never wanted." Reiko smiled faintly. "Dreams change. The trick is not to lose yourself when they do." Aiko remained silent, staring at the stars. "Promise me something," she said finally. "No matter what happens, we stay together. Even if it's only in spirit." The others nodded. That small promise would become their strength. The prison camp stood deep in the forest, surrounded by bamboo fences and rusted wire. The air smelled of smoke and damp earth. Inside, hundreds of prisoners lived in wooden barracks, some ill, some hopeless, all waiting. For the first few days, silence ruled. The women learned the routines, standing for roll call, rationing a cup of rice, working under the sun. Yet within that silence, they began to build something invisible, a quiet network of care. Aiko tended to the sick with whatever herbs she could find. Reiko used her technical skills to repair broken lamps, trading light for small favors. Emiko gathered wildflowers from the edge of the camp and hid them inside the women's barack, a small rebellion of beauty against despair. Sometimes they talked about home. The cherry blossoms by the river, the taste of miso soup, the laughter of friends. Those memories became their food when there was none. Months passed. One morning, a rumor spread that the war might be ending. Prisoners whispered about peace, about freedom, but the guards said nothing. Reiko found an old scrap of paper and began to write a letter she could never send to her mother in Yokohama. "Dear Mother, we are alive, though the world around us has forgotten our names. I still dream of your hands making tea, of the smell of rain on tatami mats. Tell my brothers to look at the sea each morning. That's where I'll be looking too." When she finished, Aiko placed a hand on her shoulder. "Keep it," she said. "One day, you'll deliver it yourself." It was almost dawn when the sound of engines broke the stillness. Allied troops entered the camp. The barbed gates, once symbols of despair, swung open. The prisoners hesitated, unsure if it was real. Then Emiko, tears streaming down her face, whispered, "We're free." But freedom came with silence. Many friends were gone, and the world outside had changed beyond recognition. They were thin, scarred, and yet their spirits held something unbroken. When they finally reached a small port to be repatriated, Aiko looked at the sea. We lost so much, she said quietly. Reiko nodded.
Yes.
But we also found something, each other. Emiko added, and maybe that's how we begin again. The three women stood together, the wind carrying the scent of salt and distant blossoms. The sea shimmered under the morning sun, vast, forgiving, endless. Years later, in a rebuilt Japan, a small garden bloomed near a hospital in Yokohama. Beneath a young cherry tree, three women met again. Older, slower, but smiling. Reiko unfolded the old letter she had kept through it all. I never sent this, she said, but maybe I didn't have to. We lived the message. Aiko placed her hand over the soil. For those who couldn't come back. And Emiko, now a nurse like Aiko once was, whispered, for those who believed we would. The petals fell softly around them, like a blessing from the past. And the months following liberation, life did not return to normal. It reassembled itself in fragments. The survivors of the camp were taken to a rehabilitation center near Manila. The nurses there were kind, but the silence in each room felt heavier than any wound. Aiko, Reiko, and Emiko were given new clothes and small notebooks to record their memories. The allied doctors told them writing could help heal the mind. But how could it capture what the soul had endured? At night, when the others slept, Aiko sat by the window, staring at the jungle that had once imprisoned them. She could still hear the echo of boots, the cries in the dark, the whispered prayers. Freedom was real, yet it carried the ghost of captivity. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the horizon, Emiko whispered, "Do you think we'll ever forget?" Aiko shook her head.
No.
But maybe that's not the goal. Maybe remembering is how we keep them alive, the ones who didn't make it. Reiko added, then let's promise something else. We live fully. For them. And so they did. Each day became a quiet act of defiance against despair. When they finally returned to Japan, the ship's horn echoed across the bay like a sigh from history. Yokohama lay ahead, scarred yet breathing again. Buildings were broken, but smoke rose from chimneys, signs of life reclaiming its space. Crowds gathered at the port to welcome the returning prisoners. Some were greeted by family, some by silence. Emiko's parents found her first, weeping as they held her fragile frame. "Our daughter, our brave girl," her mother cried. Aiko, however, found no one waiting. Her parents had been lost in the bombings of Osaka. She stood quietly, clutching the papers she had carried since the war. Reiko stood beside her, unwilling to leave. "Then I'm your family," Reiko said firmly. "Until the end of time." Aiko smiled weakly. "Then I'm not alone anymore." They moved into a small shared room near the hospital district. Reiko found work repairing radios for civilians. Aiko joined the local clinic. Emiko, after reuniting with her family, began training to become a nurse. Though their paths began to diverge, they wrote to each other constantly, letters full of mundane details, but also gratitude. The world around them rebuilt itself brick by brick, but inside, the past remained a shadow that never fully faded. One rainy afternoon, 2 years later, Aiko walked through a market when she saw something that stopped her cold, a small wooden music box, carved with cherry blossoms. When she turned its handle, it played a faint melody she recognized from the camp, the song Reiko used to hum during the marches. She bought it instantly. That night, she visited Reiko, who was now teaching young women how to repair communications equipment. Reiko's eyes widened when she heard the tune. "I thought I'd forgotten it," she said softly. "But it feels like it's still inside me, like we carried the song home." They sat together for a long time, the melody looping gently. "It's strange," Aiko said, "that even something born in pain can sound so beautiful now." Reiko smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what survival is, turning pain into music." The music box became a symbol between them. Whenever one of them felt the weight of memory pressing too heavily, They would play it and let its fragile notes remind them they were more than what had been done to them. BY 1953, 8 years had passed since their liberation. Japan had changed, new schools, new cities, new hopes. Yet the scars of war still whispered through old streets. An organization for former prisoners of war invited survivors from across Asia to a reunion in Tokyo. Aiko, Reiko, and Emiko all attended. At first, the hall felt overwhelming. Faces aged by time, yet familiar in the eyes. Tears and laughter mixed freely. There was grief, yes, but also gratitude that life had continued. On stage, a young woman from the Philippines spoke. "We all suffered, but we also learned that compassion is stronger than hatred. What we build together must never again fall to war." The audience rose in silent agreement. After the speeches, Emiko found a small corner and set down a vase of cherry blossoms she had brought from home. "For those who couldn't come," she whispered. Reiko, ever the practical one, added, "and for the stubborn ones who refuse to give up." Aiko placed her hand on both their shoulders. "And for the future we're still building." That night, they stayed up late sharing stories. Not about the camp this time, but about life after. The children born, the friends made, the moments of laughter that felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. It was then that they realized they hadn't just survived. They had lived decades past. The world grew quieter, kinder. The 3 women aged gracefully, their hair silver, their eyes softer but still bright. In 1975, Aiko, now head nurse at the same Yokohama hospital, proposed an idea to create a peace garden where survivors and families could gather each spring. The hospital board agreed. The garden was planted with cherry trees, white lilies, and stones engraved with simple words, for remembrance, for peace. At the opening ceremony, Reiko stood beside Aiko, holding the same music box, now worn but still playing. Emiko, frail yet radiant, joined them in her wheelchair. Aiko spoke to the gathered crowd. "We once lived behind fences, where hope was a dream. But even there, flowers bloomed. This garden is for every soul that refused to stop believing in tomorrow." The crowd fell silent as petals drifted through the air, soft as snow. Then, faintly, the music box began to play. Reiko whispered, "It's the same song." Emiko smiled. "Yes. And it still sounds like home." The 3 women sat together beneath the blossoms, older, slower, but unbroken. They watched the petals fall onto their laps like gentle reminders that even from suffering, beauty could grow. And when the breeze carried the music across the garden, those who listened could feel something sacred in the air, not sorrow, but serenity. Years later, after all 3 women had passed, the garden remained. Every spring, new nurses and visitors came to see the blossoms, to read the stone inscriptions, to sit quietly beneath the trees. Sometimes, on still mornings, when the petals began to fall, a faint melody could be heard, like the whisper of a music box carried by the wind, and one knew its source. But those who listened closely said it sounded like hope. And in that sound, the spirits of Aiko, Reiko, and Emiko lived on, 3 women who endured war, found peace, and taught the world that even behind barbed wire, the human heart can still bloom. So guys, that's it. I hope you like World War II stories. If you do, please like, share, comment your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye-bye.